Hey everybody, welcome back to another movie review. Hope you guys been enjoying the content on the channel as of late. Excuse me if I seem a little just out of it. This was a long movie. My neck, back of my neck kind of hurts because I was just trying to lay down, and just that the sound system was booming. It's just like, I don't know. I've always had like noise sensitivity when I was a kid, so it's like certain volume of certain things can like affect me. So a lot of time I was just like, like this is, you know, but uh, but yeah. So just kidding if I just seem a little out of it, and I literally just got out as well. Um, but uh, but decided to check this out just because I was curious to see how Denis Villeneuve would follow up from the first film, and and now, well, we are here to talk about that. That film being, of course, Dune, Part 2, which is the follow up from Dune. Once again, written, I believe co written and, yeah, directed by Denis Villeneuve, who has done many of work in the past, some of which we've discussed on this channel, specifically Prisoners, which I love, Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, Sicario. He's made a lot of very notable pieces, and just notable in that they're very solid craftsmanships and just generally great pieces of work. Um, but we are following up from Dune, the one from 2021, and we are following up literally as we left things with Timothée Chalamet's character, Paul Atreides, Rebecca Ferguson as his mother, traveling to with Javier Bardem and Zendaya to their culture and learning their ways and trying to adapt to their society. And in some measure is kind of the start of this, the seed of where things perhaps start to unravel for Paul Atreides and for the mother specifically, who just goes for the worst, just turns into, really it goes forward south quite early in the film. Um, and throughout the film, there is a lot of priority on this idea of control and this idea of responsibility and what it means to have that sort of burden. And in the case of characters that we follow in other aspects, specifically Austin Butler's character, Stellan Skarsgård with their tribe, and then we go, of course, to the Emperor, played by Christopher Walken, and his daughter, Florence Pugh. We see what the morality, the whole meaning behind those words, responsibility and control, burdens, those sort of things, what it means for each individual, and the gray area within all those, their own moralities. And without giving any sort of central heroic like figure, and exploring about the sort of the duality within their perspectives, showing that there is a way to view it in this respect, and then there's of course another side to that. So it's not that the film chooses to just showcase like one villain, like hero versus villain, and complete honesty. What you're watching is really that of all villains, and that is including Paul Atreides as a character. Um, and One of the things that I read about before going into this was that Frank Herbert, the author of the original Dune, was actually quite saddened that the perspective of Paul Atreides, the viewpoint of him, is that of a hero. And I'm not sure if he wrote it or if it's just his own perspective of how he looks at Paul Atreides, but he very much sees Paul Atreides as a villain and somebody who descends into to something more sinister. And that very much is the approach that Denis Villeneuve takes here. And I've not read the book, so I'm not sure if it's just more true to the spirit of the book, or if that's just taking more of what Frank Herbert's perspective of things are. I'm not entirely sure, but what I can say about this is that my feelings going into it were rather how should I say it? Just rather I'm trying to find the best word. Like I said, sorry, I literally just got out, but my feelings going into Dune Part 2 were not as strong because of my experience with the first film. In that I just found that the film to be rather forgettable, honestly. I watched a few scenes when in preparation for this, just to refresh on what had happened in the first film. But I mean, as it was pretty simple. But the issue that I took with the first film is that there was a lot of things that just felt in service to set up what this film ultimately is, um, and 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 less so in caring for developments and characteristics. And I just feel rather detached from the characters. And what I can say about this film is that there is more development, thankfully, because of that central idea about morality and the whole, um, and the perspective to responsibility and to burden and to about control, and what it means for each person. One which is on a spiritual journey, a religious perspective, the others for a political or just for selfish like desire. Um, and how all those like kind of just slip through each character. How Timothy Chalamet's character is obviously in the spiritual, but then eventually leans towards his selfishness, and perhaps there is a political edge to it as well within his own perspective. And the same can be said for Stellan Skarsgård's um, and for Christopher Walken's character, absolutely. So, um, and within that, you do get more development, and I think that is, and that it definitely is a step up from what the first film was lacking. But what the both films do have that I still take issue with, from even from the first film into this, coming into this film, is that there there seems to be an emphasis on majesty and a focus on majesty. In that, I'm saying that it's more concerned with its framing and its aesthetics, and less so to do with the characters. Even though I acknowledge that there is more development at play here, but what I say by that is that it is development that is complementary to the thematic quality of the film, and less to do with distinction and personalities of characters. Because I still don't really have much of an identity of Paul outside of just what the film is, vocalizing through a certain thematic sense. I don't get a sense of him as an individual. A lack of individuality seems to be present in this particular film, and also in the last film as well. I just don't really find much connections with anybody. There's this romance that's being developed between Timothy Chalamet and Zendaya. I didn't really buy into that. All the other characters that are throughout, I find a lack of care for the characters, but I have more of a interest in the overall thematic quality that the film is possessing. Obviously, aesthetically, it's quite interesting. That's the same to be said about the first Dune. Part two, I would say, is stronger, more aesthetically, just because it's utilizing more of its environment, and it's not just big building here, big building there. There's a little bit more variety at play, with more of an emphasis on action sequences and for more spectacle. So it pumps up more of that, of the aesthetics being more on the forefront, whereas in the first film it seemed a little bit more balanced out. It's like more elevated in this film. You get more variety and just in the scope and with the deserts, and of course you get more of just big action sequences. Um, but but For another thing, I mean, it is long, and that's another issue that I had with the first Dune, is that it was quite long, and this was definitely quite long. And Similar to that, to another film that we're actually going to talk about in a video or two soon. Um, the more that it goes, the more dry it becomes, and I, pun intended, just because of the desert. Um, it it just doesn't feel as impactful as time moves on, just because of how long we're having to sit with it, and also the fact of having to draw out this entire idea of, just again, about prophecy, about burdens, responsibility, control, this whole building to what we know is going to happen. It's just and I and it plays to the overall circumstance, specifically with Timothy Chalamet's character trying to avoid that sort of responsibility. Like, I get in that build, but in that build, instead of it being more informative and being more interesting, like the point of which things finally move and things finally just start to happen towards the end of the movie, there's a lack of understanding as to why it happens. It just sort of happens, like as if Timothy Chalamet just says, "Fine," you know. There's not a moment where there's okay, maybe that will set him off. Maybe that will push him to do this and that. I was actually thinking that, without spoiling anything, I was thinking that something would happen to Josh Brolin's character that would push Timothy Chalamet to that edge to get him to go toward in that downfall, and that would at least create some sort of sympathy and some sort of connection. Except if what really happens is just really just him devolving, or at least just, I guess, just literally just accepting of of what is. And I just, it doesn't really hit as well, at least by how the film presents itself to me. Performance wise, I also still don't buy Timothy Chalamet. I just don't see him as a leading man at all. I the times when he was yelling, it just I just don't get why people like him. I'm sorry, it just didn't really work for me. I will say the standouts for me were Austin Butler. I was surprised by this very sinister and very creepy performance that he's putting on. It's properly creepy. It reminded me a little bit of like Pennywise in some degree. Um, and as I said, I mean, thematically, it has more going on. It has a little more shades of gray at play, which do keep me somewhat interested. Aesthetically, it's still strong, and um, I I like the within the thematic quality there is some sort of developments given to the people, but my whole thing about that is that it doesn't create individuality in the characters. It's just in service to an idea, and less so with everybody having sort of um, their own sort of identity. The closest I would say is Austin Butler, where he is just this sociopathic, um, you know, character who's just completely unhinged and lacking in some sort of moral code, which is where I would say, which is where that whole his connection to the whole thematic idea of the film is. But um, but I will say it is a step up from the original. I would say that between the two, I would favor this one, but um, but it's only in what it is talking about, and less to do with everything else that it's utilizing, its characters and um, its length. It's just not as interesting, you know. It just gets that bump just because it has more going on thematically that is interesting, but it still carries a lot of the issues that I had with the first Dune. I don't care for the characters. I really found myself tuned out at some points. It's still super long. This sort of story can be told, like especially this specific portion of what the Dune story is. You could tell the story in like a 2 hours. It's entirely possible to tell the story in 2 hours, or at least find you can, like, because also the issue is that the film is having to grapple with so many subplots, with like building up a romantic setting for Zendaya's character and Timothy Chalamet, setting up these Austin Butler's whole thing and the whole idea with Florence Pugh, trying to understand the whole dilemmas at play and how that reflects her and her empire and her kingdom. Like, it's trying to tell three stories, and thankfully those stories have some merit because of what's thematically going on. But if I were to remove what is literally like the whole point of the film, the whole idea of the movie, and focus just on those characters individually, I just feel bored and I don't feel as interested. And I just so it's okay. Um, it's a step up from the original, but it's in saying that that's not a big step. It's more of a tiptoe. So, it's not a giant like improvement over over the original. Some people have been embellishing their feelings on this movie, saying like it's one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. It's just pipe down. Um, but it's okay. It's a step up, but as I said, it's more in more in the context of a tiptoe and not of a giant, leap. So, yeah. So those are my thoughts on Dune Part Two. I thought it was okay. It's better than the original, but it's not a giant improvement. It still has a lot of flaws that the original had, a lack of characteristics, a lack of personality in the characters, but it has more going on thematically speaking. Aesthetically is still pretty to look at, um, and there's more of an apparent influence, I must say, on certain films. With the original, it was like heavy on Star Wars, and this obviously takes a few cues from Star Wars. There's obviously also a cue from The Godfather Part 2 specifically. It feels that it's like taking that influence, like in the context of Michael Corleone and his downfall. It seems to be an inspiration in Paul Atreides' journey in this film. The main difference is that Godfather Part 2 is a brilliant study of that decaying, uh, psychology. Somebody who is just falling. In this, I just don't feel that. That's the main thing. Godfather Part 2 is just it, like, you feel the weight and you feel the tension, you feel the performances. I don't feel that in this, and that's a big problem. But thematically, it's interesting. Emotionally, though, it's a bit inert. So, but those are my thoughts, and you guys know your thoughts on Dune Part 2. It's been doing fairly well at the box office. We'll see how it does in the next coming weeks. But you guys know your thoughts on Dune Part 2 and the original, and your thoughts on David Lynch's version as well. I have to be honest, it's actually my personal favorite of the three. I know it has its issues, but at least it tried to do something different, where this is kind of staying in a blockbuster type, uh, it's more of a mainstream approach, and I'm just not really fond of that sort of mentality as much as David Lynch trying to do something more artistically, even though it didn't really work. But you guys know your thoughts, all things Dune, in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until then, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.